Welcome. So happy to be here with you guys today. We're talking about a topic that is so important to me. And actually, it's one of my favorite topics, not because of what actually happened, but it's my favorite because of the transformation that actually took place. So, we're talking about navigating leadership challenges in family based organizations. One of my very favorite clients was a client who was a family based organization, and they were leading in their particular market. And this was no small market. And the culture of that organization and how employees actually worked together and got along was essential. What happens? Have a situation where a leader is saying, you know what? I want to talk about one of my directors. This particular director is having some challenges. What was actually going on with that? Well, we're talking about that today because another leader has reached out with a very similar case, but in a different organization. Here's the thing: when you've been working with leaders for a number of years that are in a particular organization and they've been excelling, they've been thriving, and then a new leader comes into the organization and they have different expectations, that can be a challenge. It can also be a challenge because of the structure and the setup of the organization. So, according to the question, what's the background story? Is this leader has been brought in from another company and they are new to the organization. They are managing someone who's been with the company for 13 plus years, who has previously been successful up until this point. Well, what's really going on? What's happening, we're finding, is that the leader is not getting along with their peers. Well, let me ask you a question. Did you know that 65% of leadership challenges in family-based organizations, they actually stem from issues with the leader's performance, as well as the relationships with peers and colleagues. So it's essential that we actually address these challenges now as we head for organizational success. So I want you to not repeat this particular error. If you're a leader, what can you actually do? And if you're a C-level executive or senior vice president, how can you actually ensure that those leaders are successful? We're going to talk about that today. There are a number of things that you can actually do to mitigate that risk. One of the very essential things I would say that you should do to start out would be, have you had an assimilation, a leader or a team assimilation? And this is key because it really provides the opportunity for you to set expectations and them to get to know you and you to get to know them differently than you would with a traditional, I would say a traditional team meeting or even doing a traditional one-on-one. What I found is that when leaders have their appropriate assimilation, leader or team assimilation, you can have an HR business partner who's helping to facilitate that. They're asking some questions of the leaders. They're asking some questions of the team. And again, you're on the same page as it relates to what are the nuances, right? So what's different from the previous leader that this leader may not necessarily understand? What I found is that communication is key. When you're not necessarily communicating with your team or communicating effectively and clearly and concisely, it can be a true strategy, true challenge for employees to really understand what it is that you expect. You have to remember, if the person has been there for 13 years, like you said, they're used to being, I would say, performing well or being thought to perform well. Well, perhaps you come in, you have a different agenda or a different level of expectation. What is it that you actually expect? What does great look like for you? Because it may be completely different and they may not necessarily have an idea of how you actually work, what you actually like, what are your expectations of how do you partner with your peers? You're saying that this particular employee is not necessarily as open. Well, is that okay with your organization? What do you mean by being open? And so when you share things like you're not open or she's not open, I want you to be a little bit more specific about what do you mean with that? Because some people are very quiet and reserved. Some people are not forthcoming with the information that they actually give. Some people keep their family life separate. When I was speaking to you earlier about the leader I was coaching many years ago, what I found was that her challenges were coming from the fact that she was pretty quiet. And so her team did not feel like they actually knew her in that organization. So do you value diversity equity and inclusion in your particular organization? If so, then I want you to be sure to share that, that's important to you and why it's important and what that looks like. Again, I think we missed the mark on what something looks like. What does it look like? And let's be clear. I want you to really think about what could you actually do differently as a leader. And I say that because as a leader, you earn the right to show up and to really demand that your employees are giving you their very best. And how do you demand that they give you their very best? You're modeling the behavior that you want to see. So are you modeling that behavior, or are you just sharing this information? This is my expectation, but they don't see you go first. See, leaders go first, and I want you to go first. So again, we've talked about defining your expectations, making sure that you're clear in the performance and the behavior. One of the things I want to make sure that you stay with, and what I've seen with people who work at not just family-based organizations, but private organizations or even some small organizations, is the need to align your expectations with the organizational values. And I want you to make sure that it's not personal, right? It's not about what you personally, although you are the leader, what you personally expect. But when you're coming in new and you're coming in fresh, you want to understand the lay of the land as well. And you don't want to do anything that's going to make the employees begin to get together and think that it's just you and it's not necessarily a gap in performance. Now, what this particular leader is saying is that they believe there was an inappropriate relationship with the previous leader, which is why the feedback, I guess the performance reviews are not aligned. So there's an inappropriate relationship going on. Even with that, I would tread very carefully with that, right? Because again, that leader has assessed that employee, and if that was unfounded, that's a risky claim to make. And you always want to make sure that you're mitigating risk. And so I would just say, let's stick with the facts. Okay, so perhaps you were doing great in the past. Here's what I'm expecting now, though, and these are my expectations. This is a mission, and this is what we're going to accomplish, and this is what great looks like. If the person is worth the investment and you have the budget, then I think you should bring in a third party. Bring in an executive leadership coach, especially if you see value in that particular employee. Talk to the employee about what are their goals. Perhaps they're going through something because their previous manager has left, right? And everyone doesn't readily adopt to change or adapt to change and adopt change. So with that being said, I want you to also consider that. That's not an excuse. It's just something to be aware of. And then set boundaries for professional conduct within the organization. So again, even when I say that, I want you to ensure those boundaries for professional conduct, because you're not clearly saying that the person is not acting professionally. Your statement was that you believe that they had an inappropriate relationship with the leader, which is why the review, right? What the previous reviews were not necessarily accurate in your opinion and reflected the current performance. So again, what are your boundaries that are clear that you're establishing with this particular employee to ensure that you avoid inappropriate relationships? And that's not to say that it's currently going on with that person, but again, let's just be clear about what we actually expect. As a leader, I'm going to say also people feed off of your behaviors, your thoughts, your energy. And so are you ensuring that for this particular employee to be successful, that you understand what they need? Perhaps they need more from you as well. And so maybe they need more feedback from you. Maybe they want to get to know you and they're driven by that. So what drives that particular person? And that's why I want you to begin to get to know them and then just encourage the feedback, right? And so where can you actually assist them in gaining meaningful feedback? And are you giving meaningful feedback? Because sometimes we give feedback and it's not meaningful. There's nothing that the person can actually do with this. So again, you want to make sure it's meaningful. And with that, when you are, I would say, collecting data points from multiple people, be sure that you're explaining why you're doing that, because it can appear that you are looking for something, and that kind of drives a self-fulfilling prophecy where the employee is not doing well and they continue to not do well and they don't really have a chance to be successful, because in their mind, you're looking for something that you may not necessarily be looking for. So again, I want you to ensure that you're giving feedback openly and you're identifying those challenges early, and it's something that they can actually do. And when they do something well, I want you to be clear on what they did well, and why you thought it was good. Don't just say you did a good job. Again, that's not meaningful. So what is it that they actually did well? And then again, you're being clear with them on a regular basis as to how they are progressing, how they are looking. That's one of the things I absolutely love with organizations who adopt a policy of they don't necessarily have formal performance feedback once a year annually, right? But they're giving feedback on a regular basis so people always know where they stand. And so that's going to be key, because if your organization is anything like an organization where I coached for before, they don't just really get rid of people. So even though you may be clear on this is not really working, they are, again, family values. They're going to have a number of channels in place to ensure they're giving this person who has contributed to the organization for a number of years the opportunity to be successful. I want you to leverage resources. And so what resources are available? So we talked about executive leadership coaching. Does this person need a mentor? And when you're giving them a mentor, is it a good mentor for them? And I say that because I've seen people give mentors, and the challenge with giving a mentor is that if the person is, I'm not going to say completely different, but we'll just say that, I'll give you an example. This person is strikingly good looking. And we may think, oh, that has nothing to do with it. For some people and some organizations, some roles, it actually does matter. So if you're giving them someone who really doesn't understand what it means to be in that particular space and what comes with that, then that can be a challenge. If someone is really loud and you give them a mentor who's very quiet, are you signaling that you want them to change who they are? And we don't really want people to change who they are. We want them to channel that energy in a more productive way. And so again, we need the beauty of who they are in their diversity. So again, just be mindful of that. What training can you actually provide for them? What coaching can you actually give them? Again, how can you enhance their skill set? Those are some things that when you are in a family values based organization, you may want to consider. Because when you do that, other employees, they are looking and they're talking, and they're creating stories which may or may not be true, which can impact your organization. It can impact the culture. So it can have a trickle down effect that's more impactful than you actually realize. And so that's something to consider. And then collaboration. How do you guys collaborate? If you're expecting this person to collaborate more, to engage with their team members in a deeper way, then what are you doing to fostering that sense of unity? So are you speaking negatively or creating the idea or appearance that something else can be going on? Or are you just keeping it completely clean, right? And you're just promoting, you want people to work together. You want them to collaborate. You want to ensure that you're getting the best possible outcome that you can get. And that's 2 heads or multiple heads are better than one. And again, you're ensuring that you can have those multiple data points, right? They can see how other people are actually working and how they interact and engage with you, because you can learn by observing. So perhaps the employee is just learning by observing. And sometimes it's really just the difference of, I've got to get used to this person's style. Their style is completely different from what I'm used to. I've heard stories where people say, you know what, I'm so used to just being able to pop into this particular person's office. And then for someone else, a new leader comes and they're like, well, they don't want me to do that. They want me to actually put time on the calendar. Going back to the leader and team assimilations in the very beginning, that's something that they want to be aware of. Because if you're taking those little data points in your head and say, you know what, they're doing this, and this, and it's really not about their performance, but it's more so about you have a different style and you're making your style be reflective of that person's performance, that's where there's a disconnect. And so we don't want to do that. We want to make sure, again, you're addressing issues properly. Don't keep a running list of what they are doing. Let's not do that. Let's address it upon impact. Hey, I want to take a time out here. And that's not to embarrass them if other people are around, but again, it really is to ensure that they are clear on what happened, and you're not waiting until later on, and they have no idea what you're talking about. So that's something that I want you to really, really consider. Embracing diversity. We've already talked about that. People are just different, right? And so again, you have to respect the fact that people are different. One of the biggest things I want to ask you as a leader, how do you cultivate your own as well as your team's emotional intelligence? And this is key because that's a huge part of any organization. But in some organizations, that emotional intelligence component is much more important and much more substantial than just their regular, right, intelligence. And so I want you to, their intellects. And so I want you to really think about that. How do you cultivate it, and how do you encourage them to do so as well? How do you support them in developing that? I say that's key to understand because emotions kind of get in. And I've seen so many times where it's not really about the person's performance. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but it's not really about the performance. It's really about someone being able to manage their emotions in their communication styles. That really is it. And so I want you to be clear on that. And then I want you to stay committed to working with the employee if you can. And if you can't, then of course you have to figure out, are they in the best role? And perhaps you have to exit them from the role or from the organization. Maybe you can find another role within the organization that's a better fit. And so that's something to really consider when we are talking about employees who are not performing, who've been at the organization for a number of years with successful performance reviews, and a new leader enters the organization and it's family-based, right? Family values-based. And so there are a number of things that are going on that I want you to ensure that you're considering when you're talking about what can you actually do to help to drive that performance for yourself as well as the organization. Absolutely, you have a job to do. You have a job to do. And so it's going to be essential that you do your job, but you also want to think about the office politics that are also involved, the fallout of what happens. Those are some things to consider. Again, this person is a director. It could be that they are going to receive a package, and so could receive a package rather. And so is that something that you're ready for? Is it that you need to, again, navigate with empathy? Those are all some things to consider. So without having all of the details of that, these are just some things that I would actually just kind of recommend for you. And when people are not meeting your expectations, I want to go back to this again. When they're not meeting your expectations, who do you have involved in it? Are you sharing that with a number of people? Are you sharing that with the employee only? Are you sharing that with your manager? Are you sharing that information with the former manager if they're at the organization? If they're not at the organization, of course, we don't want to do that. Are you involving their HR business partner in that conversation? But what have you done as a leader to ensure success when you enter that organization or you take over that team? That's going to be essential. It's going to be essential. And I want you to really, really think about that, because it's not always as cut and clean. And I don't want you to have a bad taste in your mouth for the organization. Just understanding that different cultures, of course, different leaders, different organizations do things differently. And when you're promoting that family-based organization, that's a totally different team dynamic and organizational dynamic that you may not necessarily be aware or ready for, because everything could really matter depending upon that company. Again, it's essential. Build strong relationships within your team. Navigate those sensitive leadership situations effectively and cautiously. But again, take action, because you're still responsible for delivering results. But again, flip side of that is I want you to mitigate the risk. And so when we talk about the leader that I was speaking about before, what did they actually do? Again, I was their executive coach. They brought me in as an executive coach to work with this particular leader. We had a clear course of action, which included developing emotional intelligence. It included feedback channels. It included ensuring that the HR business partner, a number of people were actually involved in that, and then regularly giving feedback and touching bases to see how are we actually tracking towards the goal. And what is it that the leader is still looking for? What is it that the employee is still looking for? And I want you to be clear as a leader. The coach is not there to do your dirty work, and your HR business partner is not there to do your dirty work either. And so there are some things that could potentially come out in those conversations that you need to be prepared for, such as your leadership style, your level of support, your communications, your expectations. All of these things could actually come out. And so it could be that you end up working with the employee, but somebody else needs to work with you as well, right? And so that's something to consider. Again, it's ignoring leadership challenges is not the answer. Pushing it off to somebody else, that's not the answer. We've got to deal with it, but we've got to figure out how can we deal with it in a way that's conducive to both you as well as the organization. What I loved is that initially that particular employee was hostile and she was aggressive and angry because she did not want to be having this conversation with me as an executive leadership coach. So really took us building, I would say, bringing down those walls and building a firm foundation built on trust, that she was able to then become clear on, what are her opportunities? What does she actually see that she's not doing? And she could own it with the leader. And the leader could say, okay, this is what I see. This is the progress I'm seeing, or this is what I'm not seeing. And here's what I desire to be the next steps. But I want to say this, if you're bringing in a leadership coach to just say, I checked the box, and you have no interest in retaining that person, is that the right thing to do? You need to talk with your leadership team to see. So perhaps it's insurance for you. So you can say, we've done all of these things. But could it send, again, a bad message as well? And so I want you to be very clear on what the roles are. And that's going to take a really experienced coach being able to say, or facilitator, or HR business partner, whoever, being able to work with the leader as well as the employees, sit down and say, hey, here's where we are. Here's our game plan. Here's what I recommend. Here's what's going to happen. And here's my expectation. And a strong leader to be able to say, hey, a strong coach, rather, to be able to say to that employee or that leader, hey, you missed this meeting. And when you missed this meeting and I didn't know, here's the impact of that. And this is the message that you're actually also sending as well. So it's I would say a group effort to get the employee, that leader, on the right track. It can be done. It can actually be done. Or again, finding something that's a better role for them. The last thing I want to leave you with is the importance of being open and honest in communications as a leader. You got to be open. You've got to be honest. And being open and honest does not mean being disrespectful. It does not mean being rude. It does not mean being cold or nasty. It's just being open and honest. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what's happening. We have a disconnect here, and we got to do something about it, right? That's open and honest. And of course, you're going to be a little bit more specific with that. Hopefully this answers your question on how do you navigate leadership challenges in a family-based organization when there is a challenge with a director and someone who possibly has had inappropriate relationships with a former manager. Again, that's something I would probably kind of stay away from that because you don't have that. You don't know that. I'm assuming you don't know that. Definitely, but maybe that's something that has been communicated or shared or insinuated. So I would just stay away from things that I don't necessarily know to be true. And then again, being very clear on with individuals of just what you expect and how you are looking forward to working together and resolving that. I'm Dr. Sherilyn Payne. I would love to answer your questions on leadership as well as culture and transformation. If you have questions and you would like those questions answered, send me a message, leadership@smpistrategies.com. Again, it's leadership@smpistrategies.com, and we can get your questions answered as well. I will see you guys back here next week. And remember, maximize potential, performance, and profitability.